All right, it's time for another edition of Ball. He is ESPN's Tom Luginbill. I am Ryan Brown. What is up, Lugs? How are you today?
I'm good, man. How's your Tuesday going so far?
Man, we are doing awesome. It is a massive weekend of college football. It's funny though, we talk about, and I'm as guilty as anybody of this, Lugs. We're like, that week of football is going to be bad. Every time we
It
say
always
that,
happens.
every time there's some sort of intriguing storyline that comes up.
Well, I mean, look at it. Cincinnati goes down to Miami of Ohio, right? I mean, that was surprising after Cincinnati had played the first couple of weeks. You're always going to have, I mean, you look at my game, Florida State in Boston College. It's human nature, right? Because it's hard to get these kids to play up and play to a standard all the time, even if they look at the opponent in the wrong way, and then their focus wanes and their preparation can tend to wane. And then you go out and you find yourself in a dogfight in a scenario you probably shouldn't be in. So that's what makes, I think, even weekends like that great, because games are closer than they're supposed to be.
Right. But then when you look at a weekend like this one, then you're like, oh, yeah, now I am fired up. I am excited about this. This looks like on paper, a very entertaining weekend of college football.
What I like is we're starting to now get multiple matchups per weekend where talent's pretty equitable across the board, right? There's not this, okay, we're going to expect this and there's a 90% chance it's going to happen. Now it's going to come down to mistakes and penalties and turnovers, because the talent across the board with so many of these teams. And I know we're going to talk on this as it relates to the Pac-12 too, but whether it's Notre Dame and Ohio State, right? I mean, these matchups that we're seeing, Ole Miss and Alabama, we're not looking at it through the same lens anymore. And I think that's what is so intriguing about the matchups, because now the little things really reveal themselves when a game is close and the two teams are fairly equal talent-wise.
Ball is presented by MyBookie.ag. Code next round when you sign on at MyBookie.ag. Get that sign-on bonus up to $200 for any deposit of $50 or more. You're eligible for that sign-on bonus at MyBookie.ag. Code next round. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere. MyBookie.ag. Code next round. Let's get started with the biggest game in the nation this week as Ohio State goes to Notre Dame. I was watching the Sunday night NFL game, my Dolphins taking on the Patriots, and they brought that game up and said that it was the first time, I think, in 32 years Ohio State had been to South Bend. I'm like, that can't be possible. These are two college football blue bloods that aren't that far apart. They had to have played more than that.
Yeah.
They've only played 7 times. How have Ohio State and Notre Dame only played 7 times?
Because Michigan and Michigan State and SC and Stanford have been on the schedule.
I mean, guess literally, that's crazy.
That's really what it comes down to. They had so many mainstays that were staples year in and year out that when there was an opportunity, you probably chose not to schedule an Ohio State. Instead, you would have a service academy. So it is, I don't know why. It didn't seem odd to me watching this game in the Horseshoe last year. But there's just, I don't know, the optics of like watching the TV and seeing Ohio State in Notre Dame Stadium. Just, it looks weird to me. I don't know why, but it's off. Something's off. I don't know.
Well, it potentially looks weird because we never see it. I mean, this is the 7th time we've seen these two play. It's just crazy that they have the history they have. Geographically, they're pretty close, and they just never play one another. So I'm glad we're getting this game. I'm with you. It did look weird last year, and I didn't think that was why, because I would have thought they had played more than 6 times last year.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, I think the thing that's so neat about this time around is the tables have turned at quarterback, right? Last year, Notre Dame was trying to work around whatever the quarterback situation was. Ohio State had C.J. Stroud. Now Ohio State's breaking in the new quarterback, and Notre Dame's got a guy collecting Social Security. So, I mean, that's what's going to be a lot of fun to watch, too, is how those tables have turned.
Yeah, when I look at Notre Dame, and I look at both these teams, and I say, I don't know how much either one of them has been challenged. I mean, if I look at Ohio State, they've had a road trip to Indiana and didn't really go that well offensively for them. Kyle McCord looked a little bit overwhelmed. They didn't perform all that well. They had Youngstown State, and again, there were questions. But then this past weekend against Western Kentucky, all of a sudden, they look like the offense we expected. Now, I know Western Kentucky, the Hilltoppers are not world beaters and a comparison to Notre Dame, obviously. But for one Saturday, we finally saw that Ryan Day offense, I think, that we expected. You got to think some of that was a function of playing Western Kentucky, though.
Yeah, I think so. But I think another portion of it is the quarterback's getting more confident. He's getting more reps. He's seeing more things. The live action, and the more he plays, the more comfortable he's going to become. I thought their second quarter last week was phenomenal. They just exploded, and they're getting explosive plays now. I think he's figuring out where the parts are and how to get to those parts and how to identify the pre-snap matchup that gets Marvin Harrison where they want to get him, that gets Ibuka where they want to get him, and be able to work through that post snap. I'm not convinced they felt that confident, or he even felt that confident, because he just hadn't played very much in the previous 2 weeks of getting those reps. And now you come out of that game, and I think these two teams are built very, very similar. Offensive line play, they want to run the football, heavy play action teams, strong front seven people to be able to stop the run. Like, something's got to give in this, because whether it's Mayan Williams or Travion Henderson and the power run game of Ohio State, or it's, Ostame, the running back at Notre Dame, behind that offensive line that just wants to line up and just pound you in a phone booth. And then defensively, both teams are equipped to stop the run. And so how does the play action pass game, let's just say this, let's just say that either team is struggling to run the ball a little bit. So now all of a sudden the play action game doesn't become as prominent, but the drop back game does.
Right.
And then which quarterback really flourishes if it's that type of scenario? Now, if either team is able to run the football, at least somewhat consistently, I think you'll see both of these teams push the ball downfield. Sam Hartman is such a good deep ball passer. I think Kyle McCord is growing in that regard, and he's got the weapons around him where a guy doesn't have to be running wide open at Ohio State. They can be covered and the play can be made. If there is an edge in this, I think that's the edge, is there are more explosive playmakers on offense at the skill spots for Ohio State than there are at Notre Dame right now, at least at the wideout position. I think across the board in every other spot, two very, very similar teams.
Would you say there is a significant gap between the quarterbacks in this game? I mean, how would you qualify the gap between Sam Hartman and Kyle McCord?
If you put them both out on the field right now and put them through the same set of drills for a half an hour, you would walk away and you would say Kyle McCord has better physical, God-given tools than Sam Hartman does.
Right.
But the amount of games now that Sam Hartman has played, all of the different things that he's seen, and what has he seen defensively that he wouldn't recognize? I mean, that's how much football he's played. And he's so efficient. He doesn't take risks. He doesn't create negative situations or get behind the chains. He's just ultra consistent in everything he does. And I think, that's what every quarterback strives to be. So while Kyle McCord may have great tools, he's not there yet in terms of, every little thing. So for example, I guarantee you there's probably a high likelihood that Sam Hartman has way more on his plate in terms of autonomy, pre-snap recognition, getting out of a play, getting into another play, than Kyle McCord does right now.
Yeah.
Now, a year from now, that may not be the case. So I think that the experience side of it, the age, all of the things that he's seen, the fact that he's got a really good supporting cast, that's the difference right now between the two players.
Yeah. It is. Notre Dame and Ohio State should be a fascinating game. They're from South Bend. It used to be a game we would call a national championship eliminator, where the playoffs, you can't do that anymore. Either one of these teams could lose this game and easily still earn their way back into a 14 playoff. But still, it could be a playoff preview type game coming up in South Bend on NBC Saturday night. He is Tom Luginbill. I'm Ryan Brown. It is Ball with ESPN's Tom Luginbill, presented by MyBookie.ag. Code next round when you sign up at MyBookie.ag. Get that sign-on bonus up to $200 with any deposit of $50 or more. MyBookie.ag, code next round. MyBookie.ag, code next round. Also, get your plays before you do that at lanceslock.com. Lance has up winners every single weekend. He's coming off another winning weekend of football, including dominating in the NFL, 7-2-1 in the 10 games he played, or the 10 plays he had in the NFL, 7-2-1 on his NFL weekend, including Monday Night Football. Lanceslock.com has daily, weekly, monthly, and even season-long packages. You can see more and get your winners at lanceslock.com. All right, You spent the weekend in Boston watching Florida State. I thought this was going to be a snoozer of a game. Got to be honest with you, Lugs. It was anything but. Look, I mean, Boston College played well to be in that game. And I don't want to second guess a coach here. I personally thought he got a little too happy with his 2-point conversions. And it's easy to say in hindsight, but it is a pet peeve of mine when coaches start chasing points. I think if he'd have just played it by the book, it's maybe a little bit different game at the end.
Well, yeah, if you kick the extra point there, now you're a one-score game.
Yep.
And by going for 2 and not getting it, now you're a 2-score game. And it kind of put it out of reach. And I'll tell you, you could feel it in the stadium. It was like the air went out of the balloon, you know. And listen, I can see how and why Florida State played this game the way that they did. If you watched Boston College the previous 2 weeks, they lose to Northern Illinois, who then went on to lose to Southern Illinois. Then they were very lucky to beat Holy Cross. And in both of those contests, Boston College got pushed around. So you're Florida State, you're riding high, you're playing really clean football, you're not beating yourself, and you're like, oh, we're going to go up there and just kind of take care of business. And then Diet Kyler Murray shows up. And I'll tell you this. Thomas Castellanos, Boston College better be thanking their lucky stars if there's a one-time transfer rule. Because off of that Saturday, that would be the most tampered kid in the transfer portal right now. He's a handful. And I don't think Florida State had recruited him out of high school, but they recruited him as an athlete. They did not target him in the transfer portal. And I think they knew off of what he had done to give him a spark against Northern Illinois and then what some of the plays he made against Holy Cross. And hey, they were going to have to contend with a pretty good athlete. Boston College had a wonderful plan. The offensive game plan was fantastic. And quite honestly, even when Florida State had answers, that kid made them look wrong.
Yeah.
And then you couple that with the fact that Florida State couldn't run the football, which was really alarming because that's kind of been their bread and butter. And you could tell, okay, the team with the better athletes is going to pull away here. And then two things happened one thing happened throughout the entire course of the game. And then the other thing happened in the second half. The entire course of the game, Boston College, Ryan, 18 penalties. 18 penalties, right? So now you've got 18 penalties and you're still in the game. In fact, in many regards, as you crawl back into it, you've kind of got the momentum. And then Florida State starts turning the ball over and now gives you hope. So here you are in a dogfight. I think it's a great lesson for Florida State, given that they got away with it. But the one thing that I came away with preparing for that game and talking to Mike Norvell and talking to the players at Florida State, the difference with them as opposed to the previous years and prior to them, getting to this spot is consistency in terms of the messaging from the head coach. Every assistant coach I talked to, every player I talked to said, if we lose or we play bad and win, or we play really bad and lose, Mike Norvell is the exact same in the locker room, in the building the next day, watching film the next day, whether we win 55-0 or we lose 35-0. And he goes, that stability is why we've kind of gotten to this point. So that type of consistency in the message, I think, is why Florida State will probably play well this week on the road versus Clemson.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that, though. Just real quick, I want to touch on the penalties because two of the biggest upsets that could have happened this weekend, you can trace it right back to penalties. That game,
Colorado State,
178 penalty yards.
182 yards of penalties.
82.
And by the way, and 4 turnovers.
Yeah.
Like, Colorado's so fortunate to win that game. Yeah. And to be not to get off point, but we were talking about, going for an extra point or going for 2. I was surprised Jay Norvell did not go for it on the 4th and 2. Now, it ended up looking like it was going to be fine because when they punted it, it goes out at the 2. So now you're like, all right, great, good coaching call. And it wasn't a bad coaching call. But, dude, you're on the road. Nobody's expecting you to have been in the game. You've got all the nonsense that went on, during the week leading up to it. How do you not go for that on 4th and 2?
Yeah, but even crazier than that to me is I think Deion Sanders gave you a gift by taking the ball first in overtime.
Yeah.
You score, and you can go for a 2-point conversion and end the game. And I don't think there's one Colorado State fan that if you go for 2 and miss it there is like, God, we shouldn't have gone for 2. I think they would have loved it. You go on the road. You're going after the biggest story in college football. Yeah. I mean, I could not believe he didn't go for 2 in that overtime.
Yeah, I couldn't either. And you know what? I really credit going back to the BC Florida State game. I really credit Jeff Hafley. He's got to be pulling his hair out. But you talk about a guy who coached with conviction.
Yeah.
He was 4 or 5 on fourth down. A couple of them were on like his own 38-yard line or something like that. And the week before, he did one on his own 31, and he got it. So like those players, I think, believe in him, but they're just so undisciplined right now. They're not good enough to win. But the quarterback gives them a chance going forward.
And you saw how tough Jordan Travis is in that game. He got hit at the half. I mean, honest to goodness, going to the locker room at halftime until you came back and reported, that he was going to play. I wondered if he was going to play the second half. He looked pretty banged up there.
Yeah, I looked at Mike Norvell when he walked out, and I was doing a walk and talk with him going over to their sideline, and I said, "Listen, I got to ask the question. Are you going to go with him?" He goes, "Yeah, we actually think he's going to be fine." And he said it as I reported on it. He said it confidently. So clearly, in those scenarios, it's a pain tolerance thing because they're not going to allow you to go back into the game if you could further injure yourself.
Right.
But whatever it was he did, he came out, threw the ball really well in the second half. But Florida State's got to get back to the bread and butter, and that's getting Trey Benson going in the run game so that all the play action stuff starts to come into play for him.
All right, so you've seen both the teams in this game now. You saw Clemson opening night against Duke, and that surprising loss for them. You saw Florida State almost get a surprising loss. As these two play now, mybookie.ag has it close to a pick. I mean, these are fairly even teams in Death Valley. What jumps out in this game? What jumps out at you in this game about Clemson versus Florida State?
Now, so I know it was FAU last week, but for the first time, we actually saw Clemson play good, explosive, error-free football and get off to a fast start. That was killing them against Charleston Southern. We obviously saw them shoot themselves in the foot over and over and over again in prime time against Duke. That's got to give Clemson fans, I think, a positive vibe going in. Your quarterback was, for the most part, error-free, 3 touchdowns, no turnovers, very efficient in the passing game. You finally had a young receiver create some explosiveness in Tyler Brown. He catches 2 touchdowns. So I don't think all the woes yet are corrected, but you're going into Death Valley. It is so difficult to play there. It's if I were to equate it to your guys' backyard, it's very similar to Auburn. Very similar if you haven't been there. So difficult place to play. Clemson's got athletes. They got defensive dudes. They've got a really good, healthy run game with 2 really, really good running backs. So the fact that they got off to a better start, I still think that Florida State's got something in their locker room that I think maybe Clemson right now is questioning. I think Florida State knows they're good. Florida State has a team that really likes and loves each other and believes in one another, and they believe in the coaching staff. And I came away from that Monday night game with Clemson, and I felt like the players were playing tentatively and were not dialed in. And I don't know if they were just, disinterested is a poor phrase, but there was no fire. There was no juice. And even though Florida State struggled at times last weekend, I never got the sense that they weren't playing hard or that they weren't ready to play. I just think they got shell-shocked a little bit. So I know why this line is close, and it should be, and that's because talent's fairly equitable across the board. But given Jordan Travis and his ability, if they can get back to running the game, I probably like Florida State a little bit, even though this is on the road. Because while the players are very equal, I think Florida State might have the better team, if that makes sense.
No. And this feels like, though there are no divisions, so it could easily be a rematch. I mean, this feels like an early ACC championship game, except for Miami is out there saying, "Don't forget us. Don't forget us." We showed against Texas A&M. Maybe we're back. They get Clemson in a couple of weeks, so they'll get to make their statement. But I mean, if you're Florida State, the road to this championship still goes through Clemson, but Miami is still saying, "Don't forget us."
All the basketball schools are undefeated, right? So you got North Carolina, Kansas, Louisville,
that's true,
Kentucky, right? It's great. UCLA, it's awesome. But yes, I to be honest, we should be talking about and considering Miami.
Yeah.
Because they've got athletes, they've got players, and they're an entirely different team on offense than they were a year ago. And I still think to some degree, you can't discount Duke. You can't discount North Carolina. So there is some top to bottom competitiveness in that league.
Yeah, North Carolina's been a little bit of a puzzling team. They looked so good against South Carolina in that opening game. They were very fortunate to have beaten
State.
Appalachian State, and then I mean, I guess the Minnesota game, like I thought, I don't know. It was hard to figure out. Minnesota is so challenged at the quarterback spot. It's
Yeah,
kind of hard to evaluate that game.
they couldn't function at the quarterback spot.
No.
But the thing that bothered me early on in that game, and obviously they got out of the funk, and you're going to have turnovers, but those 2 turnovers from Drake May were bad. They were
Yeah.
glaring. They looked like Tyler Buckner's incompletions last week, where you're sitting there going, "Whoa, what did he just do?" And then they got out of the funk. But I do think that by and large, they're always in a position where they can score points, and they're improved enough on defense to cause problems for whoever they may play in the league. So, I do think Florida State is probably the cream of the crop, but you're 100% right about Miami. Unless they just lay an egg, they should be. They got Temple and then a bye, and then Georgia Tech, I think.
I think you're right.
What's that?
Yeah. I think you're right about that. I think they should.
Yeah.
I remember looking at their schedule. They should be undefeated when they play Clemson.
Correct.
Georgia Tech has shown signs of life. They played okay in Oxford.
They're improved, man.
They are.
They're improved.
Yep. They played okay in Oxford. That score is not at all indicative of the way that game was going. It just kind of it got wild late, a little bit like the Ole Miss and Tulane game.
Yep.
Yeah. There were a lot of similarities, and you were on the sidelines for that Ole Miss Tulane game. It looked a lot like that at the end. I think Miami's an interesting team. Still going to hold out. I do like, what the Tyler Van Dyke that played against Texas A&M. If you get that Tyler Van Dyke more often than not, you are going to be a tough out if you're Miami. That guy against A&M, he was so good.
He was really good. They've revamped the offensive line. Now, a lot of people are going to struggle to run the ball against Texas A&M in that front, and Miami did too. But they've got skilled athletes and speed on the perimeter, and I think defensively they're really good.
Yeah. ESPN's Tom Luginbill joins us each week for Ball. It is presented by MyBookie.ag. Code next round when you sign on at MyBookie.ag. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with MyBookie.ag. Code next round. Also, don't forget Roback. You saw Ed Orgeron, the acting CEO of Roback. I don't know if you've seen it, Luginbill. It's a fantastic commercial. It's so good. So good. Standard Road. Go Roback.
Anything with him is great.
Oh, he plays it up so well. Roback.com. Code TNR20 for 20% off your first order there at roback.com. TNR20 for 20% off your first order. All right, I'm going to pull out the handy-dandy schedule that Dunaway does for us each week. So you and I could take this Pac-12 road trip together. There are 3 Pac-12 road games that are of interest. Now, I'm just going to say up front, this first one, point spread-wise, tells you it's not going to be a great game. But through 3 weeks, Colorado has been the second highest-rated game on TV, the second highest-rated game on TV, and the highest-rated game on TV. In fact, your network, Luginbill, sent out the numbers today on Colorado State. I mean, incredible. The number that jumped out at me was at 2:15 a.m. Eastern Time, 1:15 a.m. Central Time on Sunday morning. There were still 8.5 million people watching the end of that game. That is insane to think about.
Well, so you look at those numbers, like our crew on ABC with Florida State was the 5th highest rated game of the weekend on any network. And to watch that in Pac-12 After Dark, get that type of number,
Crazy.
I mean, it just tells you how this whole entire thing has taken the college football world and really the entertainment world.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Because here's what's crazy about that. So that game number was bigger than any primetime, anything other than an NFL game, right?
Yeah.
Except for one thing. The only thing that beat Colorado State in primetime was 60 Minutes, where Deion Sanders was the guest. I mean, it's crazy. It's wild to think about.
It's crazy. It is.
But Colorado is at Oregon, and there are a lot of people that think this fun story comes to an end this weekend. Colorado is a 21-point underdog. It's a 2:30 ABC game right before you are on with Texas and Baylor in primetime there. This is it's a tough spot for them, no doubt. Colorado has done everything right. But when you go up to this game without Travis Hunter, you're playing by far and away the best opponent you've played. Bo Nix has played really, really good football. This is a lot to ask for Colorado to keep this story going in Eugene.
Well, it gets real now, right? Because now the team on the other sideline isn't a chump. They have quarterback play. They have more depth. They probably have better overall players top to bottom. And, I've given this a lot of thought because I feel like both things can be true here when we discuss Colorado. One is that they've exceeded expectations They've gotten off to a great start, and they've been the exciting talk of the town of this sport. Okay. No, I don't think anybody will debate that. But it can also be true that they've got a lot of glaring holes and weaknesses. They have yet to rush for over 70 yards in any one of the first 3 games.
Wow.
They're really struggling up front on both sides of the ball. Their penalties have gone up, and I think that if you look at who they're about to take on, you're now going to put so much more on Shedeur Sanders' shoulders, minus one of their best players. Because would it be fair to say that essentially 5 players are driving this bus for Colorado? Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Edwards, Weaver, Horn, and Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
Now you take the Travis Hunter component out of this, and we talked about this 3 weeks ago. How sustainable is this, right? So now he's out, and that's not just on offense. He's out as your returner, and he's out as your corner.
Yeah, I was going to say you've lost 2 players in a sense because of the return game. You've lost 3, really.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I heard Urban Meyer say this on their pregame show this past weekend, and he's right. He says he's 100% right. Is what happens now? Who's the next player that goes in, and what is that level of talent?
Yeah.
Is it good enough? We're going to find that out. And so, and I said this to you for the last several weeks, is we're going to see a bunch of 1-possession games in the Pac-12 because the quarterback play is elite. And right now there's Oregon State, there's Utah, and there's Washington that have proven to be formidable on defense, like pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So the question is, who can get off the field once or twice, maybe 3 times in these Pac-12 conference games over the next 6-7 weeks? Who can do that? And then is Colorado, if they can't run the ball and people throw up a bunch of points on them, can they do it just through the air and only through the air?
Right. Because
that's really their mode of operation right now. That's how valuable Shedeur Sanders is to the entire organization as it sits right now.
This will be the first game they've played, though, where the better quarterback's on the other side. True? I mean, so Chandler Morris.
I've heard say that.
Well, Chandler Morris was game 1.
I'm sorry. I see what you're saying. Well, yes, in comparison to the guys that they've played previously.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Chandler Morris, Shedeur Sanders better than Chandler Morris. Shedeur Sanders infinitely better than Jeff Sims. Shedeur Sanders better than the Colorado State freshman who was making.
And that kid played pretty good.
He played his tail off, but I'm still taking Sanders over him.
Of course.
I don't know that I take Shedeur Sanders over Bo Nix right now. Now, maybe when Shedeur is, Bo's been playing college football forever.
Yeah.
But Bo Nix is a really good quarterback, and he's playing elite football. Now, I will say this. If I take Bo Nix and put him on Colorado's team and put Shedeur Sanders on Oregon's team, Shedeur probably puts up the same numbers as Bo. So maybe it's an unfair comment by me.
No, I think it's a fair debate, and I would probably give it a 50-50 shot. Like, I don't know if I would sit there and say that Bo, because here's the one thing as a younger player than what Bo Nix is. Shedeur Sanders is so far and away more poised and accurate from within the pocket at this stage in his career than Bo Nix ever was. Remember when we used to talk about Bo Nix at Auburn? It was flushing the pocket, leaving the pocket, throwing the ball up for grabs. There was no sense of order, right? There is with this guy. And he's a lot at the same stage. Bo Nix could not do that. And I think obviously Shedeur deserves, a lot of credit for that.
I may have talked myself out of that comment. I mean, when I said it,
I think you could go either way. Like better, I maybe he's worked himself into being better. But if I were to take again and I compare him at the same stage, you would give the nod to Shedeur. And then if we fast forward 2 years from now, would you say Shedeur ends up being better than Bo?
Well, if we fast forward 2 years from now, Shedeur is going to be in the NFL probably, and I think Bo will be too.
Yeah.
But I think given
time, question.
Yeah, I think given time, Shedeur Sanders will be the better of the 2 college quarterbacks.
Well, think about what we're talking about here. Like, so you asked that question. Like, all right, well, let's ask the question about the following week. All right, I'd give Caleb Williams a nod.
Sure.
All right. They don't play Washington, but if they were playing Washington,
Penix.
Penix, okay. close. All right. So you got Bo Nix and Utah, Shedeur Sanders, because I think Nate Johnson's going to be a really good, scary player.
Yeah.
But he's so different than Shedeur is.
Well, what if it's Cam Rising? Would you put? I don't know that I would 100% take Cam Rising over Shedeur Sanders.
No, I wouldn't 100% do that either. And I think the reason why is because Cam Rising is a really good runner as well.
Yeah.
But like Cam Ward right now, he's playing out of his mind.
He's so
I don't
good.
know. Like these are great. These are great comments. This is why the Pac-12 is so good. So as good as Shedeur Sanders has been, and I think here's why Shedeur Sanders has received the accolades he's received. It's because deep down, people don't want to admit it, but they realize that if he's not on that team is probably in trouble.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what he's added and what he's provided for that team has been so incredibly important, probably more so important to that team than any other player has been to their team in college football to this point. And that's why I think it gets so magnified.
Another Pac-12 road trip. This one will be under the radar because of a couple of these other games, and it's such a big national weekend. If you want a sneaky good game, now it's on Fox, so it's not like you got to struggle to find it, but it's Oregon State at Washington State. You mentioned Cam Ward. Our show has a healthy respect, especially Lance, for Jonathan Smith. Good football coach. Cam Ward, excellent quarterback. I think this could be a really, really fun game in Pullman, 6 o'clock on Fox.
So this should be a really, really, really good game. I think Oregon State can run the football at will. I think they're one of the stingiest defenses. People still don't respect them to the level that they should. But here's my issue. DJ Uiagalelei showed up last week.
Yeah.
14 of 30.
Yeah.
And it was just like.
Ugly game against San Diego State. Ugly game. Yeah.
It's just, and you sit there and you go, if somehow Washington State can get hot on offense and kind of play in a similar fashion to how they did versus Wisconsin, I don't know how Oregon State would keep pace with them because DJ's not a track meet guy. Right. They want to run it. They want to come off a heavy play action. That's my concern because I still think that Oregon State's good enough if they have competent quarterback play because they have so many other complementary parts. They're good enough to be a 10-plus win team this year, even with DJ. But to beat the really, really good teams, they need DJ to play out of his mind.
Yeah, if you watched Oregon State last week, you're like, oh, yeah, that's why DJ is not at Clemson anymore. I remember that now.
Remember that? Because, exactly.
The first couple of weeks, you were like, oh, wow. They took Cade Klubnik over this, huh? Okay. And then you're like, okay, that's why Cade Klubnik is starting right now at Clemson. I remember this now. One other game just before that one is UCLA at Utah. You mentioned the Utah quarterback situation. It is continuing to be unsettled with Cam Rising having been out. It is not unsettled at UCLA. This Dante Moore kid has looked really, really good for Chip Kelly, who has been known to have excellent quarterbacks over the years.
Yeah.
And his skill set seems to be more along the lines of what he has had with a Marcus Mariota or somebody like that back in the Oregon days.
So UCLA, a lot of people aren't familiar. They returned 9 starters from last year's team, which was a successful football team. And then they've played 3 quarterbacks. They've played a multitude of running backs. And I think they've fared well. Obviously, the schedule hasn't been overly daunting. But I got 2 words for you on this one. Rice Eccles.
Tough place to play. Yep.
Playing at Utah is a different bird. And so now we're going to find out with Dante, how does he handle that environment, right? How does it, because they've been in the friendly confines so far. Now that crowd, the way that stadium's divided, I mean, they are right on top of you. And they have maybe the best student section in the country, if not in the top 2 or 3 with Iowa and Penn State. My old Taco Bell Liv Moss student section days. But it's what Utah decided to do by going with Nate Johnson full-time in the 4th quarter of the Baylor game has set them on the correct path because that kid's hell on wheels as a runner, and he's functional and good enough in the passing game where they're going to be able to run it. They can play action. He's going to be used as a designated runner. And Utah is, I got Baylor in Texas this week, so I'm watching that Baylor game, and Utah is just suffocating on defense. I don't know if I've seen a team this year so far that plays off of blocks and leverages the football as well as Utah does. So I like Utah on this one. I'm interested to see how Dante Moore performs because I think he's an immense talent. Chip Kelly's done a good job, but this will be a really revealing game for both teams.
Yeah, fun game there, 2:30 on Fox. Luginbill's mentioned Texas Baylor, 6:30 ABC. In that prime window, we've just got great games. I mean, that prime window, you got that one, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Iowa, Penn State. So many good games in that one, or games in that window. The 2:30 window, you got Colorado, Oregon, UCLA, Utah, Ole Miss, Alabama. Just there's just great games all over the board this weekend. You could play all of those games at mybookie.ag, code next round. That is mybookie.ag, code next round. Get a sign-on bonus up to $200 with any initial deposit of $50 or more. They also have that parlay cash out. Say you play 2 legs of a parlay. You don't like the way that third leg feels. You don't want to stay up late and watch it come home. You could cash out and use that money elsewhere. mybookie.ag, code next round when you go to mybookie.ag. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere. Also, lanceslock.com, another winning weekend for Lance in the NFL. 7-2-1 over the weekend. He had an overall winning weekend with college football and the NFL. You can get daily packages, weekly packages, monthly packages, a full season at lanceslock.com. lanceslock.com. Take those plays over to mybookie.ag and have a fun weekend. All right, last topic. We're going to talk a little Big 12 here. So when I say the best of the rest, I'm talking about the non-Texas and Oklahoma teams. Texas and Oklahoma making that final lap here. They both look pretty good. They'll play each other. I think they should be undefeated when they play each other in a couple of weeks in the Red River game. But they're going to be going. And that's going to leave behind a bunch of other Big 12 teams. And I was just scanning around after watching Kansas State
I know what you're going to say.
Lose to Missouri. And I'm like, who's the best team, Lugs? Who's
Rock
the best
Chalk.
of the rest?
Rock Chalk.
I mean, BYU and Kansas play this weekend. It's another one of those
BYU
2:30
beat
games.
Arkansas.
I know. BYU, Kansas play. And people think I would say this just to be crazy. Jaden Daniels is a really good quarterback for Kansas. Keaton Slovis played pretty well for BYU against Arkansas. I mean, that might tell me who the best non-Texas Oklahoma team is in the Big 12. Is that crazy?
It's not crazy right now. Until we see Baylor get off the mat, until we see Texas, Tech develop some consistency. Obviously, TCU got off to a rough start with the opener, heard around the world. But I do think, first off, we have to acknowledge how good of a football coach Lance Leipold is.
Yeah, he's so good.
This is a guy that's won everywhere he's been, multiple national championships at a level where the players aren't even on scholarship, right? And then he takes over a Buffalo team, and I remember going, oh, man, Lance, because I had done a bunch of the Stag Bowls, right? So I got to know him when they were playing Mount Union every year. And I'm like, oh, Coach, why would you take that job? Like, you've done such a good job. There's got to be a better job than that one. And then he just turns the dang thing around in basically a blink of an eye, pre-transfer portal, mind you.
Right.
Then he goes and he takes the Kansas job. I'm like, Coach, come on, dude.
Jobs.
I said, Coach. And then now I sit there and I look at myself and go, why was I doubting any decision this guy has made in the coaching profession? And they are so principled in their values and like the core foundation of, very similar to Mike Norvell, by the way, of consistency and the messaging, and they can run the football and they're going to beat you up and bloody your nose. And oh, by the way, they got a superstar quarterback. That kid is like the kid Boston College has.
Yeah.
They're very, very similar. And so now you got to deal with I watch them on offense and I immediately go, this is what they need to be doing with Jalen Milroe.
Wow.
Like that's in my mind. I'm like, that's Jalen Milroe, right?
Yeah.
I do think Jalen Daniels is a much more pure passer probably than Jalen Milroe is at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, gosh, dang. I mean, Kansas State goes down. And I think can you believe we're saying this? We're literally saying Kansas and Kansas State would maybe be at the top of the heap.
I think
we don't know yet. The team down the road that you'd have to, I don't know if they have the right coach right now, but if Houston is the team that none of those coaches in that league wanted to come into the league.
Yeah.
Is Cincinnati in the discussion?
I mean, they just lost to Miami, Ohio.
Just lost Miami of Ohio.
Yeah.
I mean, Oklahoma State just got throttled by South Alabama.
I mean, Luke, that game was 24-0 at one point. They dominated. South Alabama dominated that game. Now, South Alabama's good, by the way. You watched a lot of tape on them
last year.
Yeah, and you watched tape on them when you were getting ready for Tulane and Ole Miss. It's a good team. Central Florida just lost John Rice Plumlee to an injury. Maybe with him, you would consider them. But, I mean, I'm serious about this. I do think – and look, Kansas State lost to Missouri. Will Howard was lipping around in that game.
Yeah.
So was Connor Cook, for that matter, for Missouri. It may still be Kansas State, but if you told me the winner of this game, BYU-Kansas, is the best non-Texas Oklahoma team in this league, I'd say, okay, I believe it.
Yeah, I think that's what it is right now. I mean, it just kind of is what it is. And I will find out, because that was a big win for BYU. I had that BYU-Arkansas game a year before in Provo, and that was a no contest. So kudos to Kalani Sitake's team for coming back. So, and the fact is, Kansas won't be taking BYU lightly now. You know, they're going to take them real serious. So that could make out for a good game. I just don't know if I trust Keaton Slovis. There's just been too much up and down. There's been too much streakiness, and so we'll see how that thing goes forward.
The thing about the Big 12, obviously, they've got the Texas win over Alabama to hang their hat on as a conference. When we start looking at, what have you done out of conference? But the other thing they have is against Power 5 teams, they're 6-6 out of conference. And worse than that, against Group of 5 teams and FCS teams together, they've got 6 total losses. And they took 3 of them last week, including, as you mentioned, that Oklahoma State loss to South Alabama, which was an embarrassing loss, 33-7. So out of conference, when we talk about the SEC has struggled out of conference, the Big Ten, their best out of conference win is West Virginia, Penn State beating West Virginia. The Big 12 overall, while they might have some good wins to hang their hat on, just the overall record has not been great out of conference for them.
No, it hasn't. Really, the only conference that's had a great out of conference record is the ACC.
I know.
Versus not only the SEC, but versus the Big Ten, particularly this last weekend.
I know.
And so, it's Texas State went in, and the thing that was weird about the Texas State Baylor game is that wasn't like Baylor let them hang around and they screwed it up and lost. Like, Texas State won that game. Like, Texas State was in control of that game, which was dumbfounded to watch that thing. So
especially when you know who was playing quarterback in that game after you've watched his career, and he looks like a world beater. Yeah, TJ Finley looked like a world beater against Baylor.
I know it. Unbelievable.
I mean, it made no sense. But yeah, I mean, that's we talk so much about conferences, how they've done out of conference. And again, look, that Texas win, I'd probably still have Texas number 1 if I were an AP voter on the strength of that win at Alabama.
Yeah.
But as a conference overall, it has not been a great out of conference for them. But to your point, it may not have been for anybody but the ACC.
Remember, Texas came out 10-10 with Wyoming going into the fourth quarter at home.
I know.
Right? And we talked about that. Like, one of the things I want to sit down with Sark when we meet, later on in the week is, like, have you been able to put your finger on it? Like, what is it? So, for example, Quinn Ewers, you almost get the sense that if the game is not on a national huge stage and there's not a lot of hype surrounding it, he goes on cruise control.
Yeah.
It's weird. And it was that was a really weird game going through the coach's tape on that deal. But if you would have told me that team beat Alabama on the road, I would have said, no way.
No way. Yep.
Absolutely not. There's no way you could convince me of that.
Yeah.
So
I flushed the Rice performance just thinking, look, I mean, they had Alabama the next week.
It was the same thing.
Yeah, but I mean, but I thought they're playing Alabama. They're going to go through the motions. They're not going to use any motions. They're not going to use any exotic sets. They know they can line up and play base and win this thing easily and save any of that for Alabama. Yeah. So I but then they're right back. They reverted right back to it against Wyoming. It was very weird.
Yeah, and it's just, I talked about, after that win, like, that's the next hurdle, right? You get that program defining win. Now, how do you avoid going out and doing exactly what they just did? Now, they were very fortunate to win. They won the game. They played a really strong fourth quarter, and they found a way to finish, which is encouraging. But, you got to be concerned if you're going to go on the road in prime time at Baylor against a team that's kind of backed into the corner, and it's a really difficult place to play.
All right, that is a 6:30 game, by the way, on ABC, where you'll see Luginbill and his crew, Dusty and Dave Pash, and the gang there in Waco. Ball each week presented by mybookie.ag. Don't forget code next round when you sign on to mybookie.ag. Get that sign-on bonus up to $200 for any initial deposit of $50 or more. Also, lanceslock.com coming off another red-hot football weekend, including 7-2-1 in the NFL, including Monday Night Football. You can get all those plays at lanceslock.com, daily, weekly, monthly, even season-long packages right there at lanceslock.com. And don't forget to go to roback.com. Get all your gear for the fall with those great hoodies and quarter zips. Roback. Go Roback. Roback.com. TNR20 for 20% at checkout. TNR20 for 20% off your first order at checkout at roback.com. All right, Luke, enjoy Waco. We'll see you next week on Ball.
Sounds good, man. Always enjoy it.